Have you heard Post Malone's new country song? Look, everybody knows we're all living in the alternate dimension, bizarro timeline where everything got messed up and weird. Just embrace it. We're all gonna be okay. But part of that means figuring out what the hell is going on with music right now. How did we get here? Who is Shaboozey? That's what this video is. A look at genre, how we define it, how it's evolved over the years, and why in a lot of ways it seems to barely even exist anymore. And yeah, Post Malone is the latest big name from well outside Music Row to put out some country, and it's doing numbers. Looking at the CMA Fest lineup from just a few months back, there are some interesting quirks. If you're paying attention, I'd argue that speaks to a larger shift in how we categorize music and the few remaining labels that actually still mean much of anything. To understand the current landscape of genre, we need to revisit some recent moments in music history, both larger trends and specific songs. So first up, in 2013, top 40 music got weird. That was a culmination of several factors, but the important shift to focus on specifically is how alternative became pop. Rewinding a little bit from there, here's a very abridged history. When the boy band craze of Y2K and golden age of R&B quickly sobered into a reflective post-9/11 country ballad revival, punk was quietly preparing to take charge for shaping the protest sound of the W. Bush administration. Meanwhile, the rest of rock found itself so splintered between nu metal, adult alternative, a surprising amount of Christian screamo, and objectively far too much sleazy butt rock that by the time we would arrive at the zenith of mainstream emo, the Black Parade may as well have marked a funeral for the wider genre overall. Both sonically and in terms of subject matter, much of America's popular music vibe was, let's call it, heavy. Most songs and artists across every genre were taking themselves pretty seriously back then, but the perpetual ebb and flow of trends was about to course correct on a dime. In response, and stark contrast, the early 2010s would be largely defined by escapism. The top 40 charts had an appetite exclusively for big, dumb, and loud. This is a good time to sell your stock in guitars, folks, because we're about to go all in on 808s and start party rocking in excess.
Every day I'm shuffling.
Maybe millennials do deserve the hate. Either way, everybody just have a good time may as well have been a government mandate, and there was no shortage in supply. Kesha, Nicki, Pitbull, Katy, a cacophony of club banger after club banger dominated the airwaves, only after a years-long stretch would the oversaturated fad finally run out of steam. Its style over substance party scene and increasingly unrelatable best night of your life narrative dominating for as long as it did started to make most average listeners feel like they were on the outside looking in. Where was the alternative? Where was the pop music for the people? Todd in the Shadows has credited Lord's, quote, anti-pop pop anthem as the definitive marker for this dividing line. I'd call that pretty spot on. Not to glaze too hard, he took a mild shot at vintage Michelle Branch a few months ago. I'm ready to fistfight the guy. But to piggyback off his point, if Royals wasn't the catalyst, it was at least the signifier. From then on, the spotlight had been reclaimed from the big pop idols, and for what felt like the first time in a long time was anyone's to grab. Lord's massively influential debut did to the music charts in a lot of ways what Shrek did to animated movies. Their criticisms of the established hitmakers and classic Disney fairy tale formula, respectively, weren't just overt, but also able to cross into the mainstream, specifically by Trojan horsing themselves into the very genre aesthetic they were each rebelling against. Her stripped-down arrangement and subtle polish struck the right balance with its pointed messaging to shake up the industry in ways that predecessors like Pumped Up Kicks and Somebody That I Used to Know had only planted seeds for. By this point, the remainder of the 2010s belonged first and foremost to the relatable outsider. Alternative became pop. A look at the charts any given week wouldn't feature much of the expected Rihanna or Coldplay. Instead, we were at a time where some of the only 8 songs on radio repeat were from artists like Echosmith and the Lumineers. If those names mean nothing to you, don't worry about it. Anything we gained in variety came at the expense of staying power. Complete nobodies were wandering out of the woodwork to drop what felt like some of the most inescapable singles in living memory, only to vanish into obscurity mere months later. Iggy Azalea, Magic! And Passenger made some of the classic one-hit wonders of the 80s seem practically capable of releasing best-of compilation albums. It wasn't just that some of these newer artists were forgettable, a lot of their music was just sort of there. Tracks like Am I Wrong by Norwegian duo Nico and Vinz currently have a couple billion combined streams across all platforms, despite seemingly never having been anyone on the planet's favorite song, let alone ingratiating this artist to the public in any meaningful way. Many of this era's popular hits sounded like unremarkable filler, a trendier take on easy listening destined for the background of every decaying department store and airport bathroom. I bring this up to attribute it mostly to what pop had become by swallowing the whole of alt, rock, and electronic, a vibey, homogeneous average, often with no interesting definition or identity of its own. I'm overgeneralizing here, but the fallout and ramifications of that shift have meant that for quite a while now, there have really only been 3 noteworthy genres: rap, country, and everything else is just pop. Pop music, regardless of what stereotypes you might associate with that label, has in fairness always technically been a catch-all term. Academically, the word just describes music made for standalone popular consumption and doesn't exclude much more than orchestral music or instrumental jazz. But colloquially, at this point, we use it to talk about any music that wouldn't be more accurately described as hip-hop or country. Pop is the default happy medium between what continues to feel like opposite ends of a spectrum. To be clear, country has been flirting with hip-hop for ages. Going once again back to the early 2010s, Florida Georgia Line, the patron saints of bro country, were best known for their Cruise remix featuring Nelly. Token rap verses had become a common staple among radio pop singles, or as I still remember an acquaintance tweeting at the time, rap is the new guitar solo. Out of place as they may feel, they were often employed as a shortcut to crossover success, because while pop country singles were typically still treated as country songs, a pop country song with a hip-hop feature could more or less pass as a regular pop song. Even material strictly marketed as pure country has had an infatuation with hip-hop elements ever since. Morgan Wallen himself has been using trap beats in his songs ever since he blew up. Still, rap had no serious interest in reciprocating. Not until, well, there's no way you've forgotten about this one yet.
I got the horses in the bag.
Old Town Road is complicated, to say the least. It occupied the #1 Billboard spot for more consecutive weeks than any song ever has, or quite possibly ever will again. Its beat was purchased for $30 and samples 9 Inch Nails. The more popular remix and official video featured country music throwback Billy Ray Cyrus, much better known these days as the on-screen and real-life dad of Hannah Montana. On top of all that, it was released by an undiscovered teenage SoundCloud rapper. The song was too strange, too polarizing, and way too popular to be talked about strictly as music. It's always been a lightning rod for think pieces about gatekeeping, race, sampling, and meme culture. Despite the unprecedented success, Old Town Road will be remembered primarily for the moment around the music, much in the same vein as Gangnam Style and the Harlem Shake, flash-in-the-pan novelty smashes that in hindsight feel like a fever dream too distinctly of their time to really hold up long-term as music. But this song matters. The first truly mainstream success in hip-hop going country loudly raised important questions about genre, all while, not for nothing, being packaged in what we could, with only a few minor asterisks, confidently call the most viral song in history. For better or worse, this song paved the way for modern genre bending to the extent that I can't really omit bringing it up while trying to contextualize someone like Beyonce releasing country music.
This ain't Texas. Ain't no
Texas Hold'em and its accompanying surprise release album Cowboy Carter generated probably even more passionate backlash than Old Town Road. Much the opposite of Lil Nas X during his unlikely debut, Beyonce had already been an A-lister for so long that she's really a celebrity icon first and an artist second. That's nothing against her talent-wise, she's just at that self-sustaining level of super fame that can weather years at a time away from the charts. Still, it was a little more straightforward for the gatekeepers of country music to dismiss her as not belonging to or representing the genre. and this time felt more calculated, more reactionary. Beyonce is from Texas. The song's banjo riff, stomp clap rhythm, and gospel elements in the vocal arrangement is much more traditionally country than Old Town Road's bass-boosted drum machine and bars about sipping lean. But the industry, and to a larger extent country music listeners, have been reluctant to give it a pass for reasons they struggle to even articulate.
It's Beyonce, what is it? Beyonce Underwood. Or Beyonce Twain. Look out, everyone.
So I guess it's just a coincidence. Yeah, compare that to Post Malone and I Had Some Help. Hardly anyone is struggling to embrace this one's spot on the country charts. It certainly sounds right at home there, was released as a collab with Morgan Wallen by someone you wouldn't really describe primarily as a rapper in the first place, and who is, let's not kid ourselves, a white guy. Posty is originally from Syracuse, but grew up mostly in the DFW suburbs of Texas. He's been an acoustic singer-songwriter to some extent since well before he got popular, and in fairness, has been dipping his toes into the CMA world for years now. So is it any good? As summer jams go, I like it. It has some clunky phrasing in the already impersonally vague lyrics. The subject matter is nothing remarkable, 2 sides to every breakup, fair enough. I wouldn't call it anything unforgettable melodically. Despite any of that, it's competent, reasonably catchy, and I'm not smart enough to come up with a better word here. It's fun. And no one should be at a total loss for what makes this song work. It's kind of right there in the title. Yeah, he had some help. A collab with Morgan Wallen is more than enough endorsement to chart, no questions asked. He's arguably the hottest name in country music and has been for a while. There are also several high-profile co-writers and producers on the project from pop, country, and hip-hop. But the real reason the song is good is it's just Learnin' to Fly by Tom Petty. Do people know that? I feel like not everybody knows that. But now you do. Same key and everything. So credit where credit is due, in more ways than one. But the success of this song does speak to the low bar that country music has been living at for a long time now. One that was vulnerable to being indirectly called out, or at least overshadowed by this exact type of situation. Despite occupying what feel like opposite sides of a spectrum, country and hip-hop share more in common than they get credit for, and a big one is gatekeeping authenticity. They each stereotypically use a romanticized cultural celebration of humble, lower-class roots in rural and urban America, respectively, as a barometer for how genuine an artist should be perceived. To quote producer Susan Rogers, authenticity reflects a meaningful thread in the tapestry of human experience, whether a nuanced sentiment like pathos or bemusement, or a strong basic emotion like joy, fear, or sadness. Musical technique must be learned, but musical feeling is instinctive and thus readily appreciated. People have a bullshit meter, and they'll use it most critically toward the particular style of art they enjoy. I'd argue that for both genres, this criteria is usually applied to the personal image of the artist, even more so than any individual performance or studio release. Where you come from and how it shaped you matters a lot in both cases, so much so that a cliche and not insignificant subset of them is material written about how country they are or how hip-hop they are. Because an important component of that credibility is that from a business perspective rather than an artistic perspective, it seems pretty easy to counterfeit. Modern country music deservedly gets clowned on all the time for having devolved into a Mad Lib-style checklist of buzzwords meant to signify an image more than communicate anything genuine.
You know the words, you know the phrases.
And as long as you can fake a vocal twang with a little conviction, you're in. Not to say there aren't exceptions like Stapleton or even Tyler Childers. Love to see a fellow Tyler doing well. We didn't choose the 90s fuckboy name, But it's no discredit to point out that they each stand out among some uninspired competition. You may have heard AI country songs making the rounds online, and unsurprisingly, those soulless predictive text models are best at imitating country in particular. Having an original thought may not be something AI is capable of, but it's not like that's a prerequisite for country music right now. It also begs the question, what would satire of a country hit even sound like if not an actual country hit? In 2021, Walker Hayes released his viral earworm Fancy Like, a sonic incarnation of the Instagram meme account Middle Class Fancy, so blatant that it poses interesting legal questions about how we conceptualize songwriting credits. Now, as music, I hate Fancy Like, but I do find it fascinating as insight into the state of the industry. It's, however unintentionally, painfully sincere, and for my money is a sort of ground zero for when modern country music finally embraced openly acknowledging the fact that it is now beyond parody. Hayes' 2.5-minute claim to fame is something halfway between an Applebee's jingle and a TikTok dance. From a writing perspective, he's clearly going for country music's version of thrift shop, except he isn't challenging a wealth-obsessed subculture blinged out in overpriced designer brands with his new pair of piss-covered Goodwill moccasins. Walker Hayes is a middle-aged dad paying for a date-night steak dinner at Applebee's and pretending that's slightly fancier than it actually is. That's not really much of a joke. It's barely hyperbole, and it sure as hell isn't sarcasm, because when he sings those words, I believe him. I believe him a hell of a lot more than I believe the tired old cliches from the established hitmakers about driving the biggest truck, drinking the coldest beer, and scoring the hottest chicks. So on one hand, everything about the message, structure, and presentation of Fancy Like is constructed as if it's some Weird Al bit that isn't supposed to be taken seriously. But the delivery is the furthest thing from irony. His version of a fancy date night is a corny chain restaurant, cheap beer in a plastic cup, and turning in early. Nothing against Walker Hayes the person. There was nothing wrong or even artistically distasteful about releasing this for shits and giggles. Much as it's a strange inversion of parody, he's at least self-aware enough to own the butt of the joke, and it clearly struck more of a chord with middle America than anyone involved was smart enough to realize it obviously would. The real problem with Fancy Like was that the rest of country radio had been a dumpster fire for so long, they knew they could get away with playing this joke song right alongside their actual hit country songs and dare us to even try to tell the difference. Even under the pretense of a comedic angle, it sounded too much like every other Flavor of the Month country hit not to accidentally become one of those same Flavor of the Month country hits. But maybe that doesn't give the song enough credit. The genre wasn't lacking music that sounded like this, but it was lacking authenticity, and suburban listeners actually related to this unironic celebration of all things tasteless and unclassy. They related to it a lot more than the endless stream of stale power fantasy cliches that harkened back to the exact same posturing of pre-2013 pop. So, all that to say, if Fancy Like is, or might as well be, representative of what modern country music has become, anyone trying to protect its sanctity from the likes of pop or hip-hop crossovers is pretty hard to take seriously. And if deviating from pop only has two viable avenues, I wouldn't be surprised to see more of it. I've mentioned the three-genre distribution as a spectrum, but it's not lost on me that I'm essentially describing horseshoe theory. That's not something I subscribe to in a political context, but in the yee-haw spirit, might as well lean into the visual metaphor. Similarities between two opposite ends of deviation from the cultural default does kind of invite that kind of framing. Where going the rap or country route almost definitionally requires committing to a specific aesthetic or smaller niche of listenership, pop is a label we apply based more on a criteria for what a song or artist is not. And in that sense, genre can be seen as restrictions for artists to conform to rather than a way for listeners to simply differentiate after the fact. Cowboy Carter addresses this head on. Genres are a funny little concept, aren't they? Yes, they are. In theory, they have a simple definition that's easy to understand, but in practice, well, some may feel confined. Just dodging that copyright strike, sorry. Switched on Pop explores authenticity through the performance of identity. Quote, to perform one's identity is to enact a particular intentional public face, the clothes we wear, the expressions we use, or in the case of the pop star, the music we make. This chapter is a case study on Britney Spears, specifically the ill-defined and often contradictory nature of her artistic persona. It makes the case that a duality between playing up her youthful innocence in contrast with feminine promiscuity was in many ways a conscious marketing decision. Noting that ambiguity allowed for the widest audience possible to project their own preference onto her brand, the book then asks, how does the music itself function in obscuring the real Spears from her public avatar? The book goes on to credit mirroring Toxic's lyrical duality through its tonally ambiguous chord progression and use of counterpoint in the vocal melody of the later choruses. Cowboy Carter takes a similar approach by being unashamedly country in some parts, but returns to Beyoncé's established musicality in others. In terms of public image, Post Malone's brand might reside there more than anyone's at the moment. There's something appealing about at least the idea of country music. It's the only current noteworthy genre that naturally lends itself to conventional live performance using real-time collaboration and analog instruments rather than pre-recorded backing tracks. The old adage about 3 chords and the truth has probably never been more relevant, not just to country, but all of music. It's easy to get cynical and assume people just mindlessly gravitate toward whatever is already popular, but I think transcending genre isn't just an important skill for artists, it shows that regardless of the source, we still crave authenticity. The current CMA Song of the Year is actually Luke Combs' cover of Fast Car, originally a folk song by Tracy Chapman, a queer black woman. The cover is tasteful, he's been performing it live as a sincere fan nearly his entire career and has the receipts. An archetypical modern country artist made it more palatable for his audience, and while plenty of us might feel conflicted about that being necessary, give me this song over Fancy Like any day. It's hard to imagine genre fluidity becoming less common at this point. Innovation in technology as the primary catalyst for emerging trends and genres has stagnated. We'll never move from acoustic to electric guitars to analog synthesizers to cheaper and more advanced audio production software ever again. We don't intentionally curate our music libraries as physical media with loose, sometimes arbitrary labels for what specific sounds are our favorites anymore. We're passively fed recommendations by sophisticated digital algorithms. So genre as a concept doesn't feel fully dead, but more like an obsolete relic of FM radio, more focused on distribution than art. Most success stories put roots down in a particular niche to some extent, but strict artistic bounds aren't actually a standard we hold actors or directors to, and in many, if not most cases, they're better off for it. Artists like Shaboozey, Jelly Roll, and maybe now even Post Malone have already made a niche in that sort of in-between space. I'll end on another quote, and leave these in the description in case you want to check them out for yourself. Genre isn't just a matter of musical taste gravitating towards certain timbres. Genre is a matter of identity. As scholar Nadine Hubbs writes, when people say, "I like every type of music except country," they're not just dismissing the style, but they're intentionally separating themselves from people who listen to country, or rather the people they imagine listen to country. I'm not the biggest country music fan personally, but it's true. Identities are complicated and ever evolving. I think they should be allowed to transcend the politics of genre. Art requires authenticity, and you won't always cultivate that by boxing yourself into arbitrary restraints to fit a particular label. We could all stand to be a little less precious of this stuff if it's only meant to artificially gatekeep certain artists, or especially hold certain types of artists to inconsistent standards about who gets to create what. Transcending genre is how we get influential new sounds so often in the first place. I'd like to think Tom Petty would agree. I gotta quit getting sentimental at the end of these. Chapel Roan ska album coming soon is basically what I'm saying. I don't know. Bye.